Oh yes, as you read well, now we speak precisely of this bad neighborhood, i.e. how many websites are hosted in your web server? Actually put, such a question seems a little trivial for the series, because it should never affect me. As the title says, all this and much more is part of the Bad Neighbor series of websites. What is a web server? But before you answer the question, let us briefly understand the problem better in front of which you were finding the front. Meanwhile, what is a web server? I'll try to give you an answer not from Wikipedia. A practical response, we say. A web server is a machine on which a software is installed that allows you to exchange data with the network. This in general. For what you need to, as a web server is a machine in which they are installed your websites purchased from the companies that manage them. For example, this is of Aruba, at least at the time of writing this article. The main hosting companies. These companies usually take the name of the manager of websites. The name is easily understandable as precisely handle millions of websites. Just as big companies, see Aruba, arriving to manage several million websites. Other major companies that manage the websites are HostGator, SiteGround, DreamHost, OVH, Godaddy, etc. etc. Basically they offer you a web space whose settings will ask you. Depending on the type of settings, you have different site configurations, ranging from classification sites, sharing, when your website is located on multiple physical machines, hosting, and is managed shared with other websites, i.e. you have available certain resources that you share with other websites that operate in the same physical machines. Be careful because it is an important concept. This type of solution is the most economical of the web, but even the most dangerous, but we shall see later. Server cloud. In practice this is an advanced solution sharing, i.e. your website continues to be on shared hosting, but with a mechanism by which has a ceiling of resources guaranteed. We speak of RAM, disk space, and bandwidth, which it is not the case in the simple sharing where, if a website hosted on the same web server occupies, for example, too much RAM, will surely not be much for you. VPS stands for Virtual Private Server. Let's just say that the cloud server arises from the failure of the VPS. And political statements correct, but that makes it alright. In practice you have replicated a physical environment to a virtual environment. You seem to have a dedicated server, i.e. single type, RAM and CPU resources storage well defined, but in reality you will find yourself still in a virtual environment. In fact, the VPS is exactly between the cloud server and dedicated server. Cloud inheritance the virtual environment, the dedicated physical. Why mainly it did not work is just that, because it is neither soup nor wet bread. And moreover, for its configuration serve the knowledge of a dedicated that not everyone has. In contrast to the cloud server that you find already pre-configured model sharing. Dedicated. Although it would be more correct to speak of dedicated seeds, as the clean around the network they are very few. The reason is obvious. The price. A dedicated server, or in fact seeds, is like if you have a computer dedicated to you, you're not at home, but from a manager. Even some hosting companies offer the ability to program the dedicated server in the place where it is. Then of course there are a whole series of intermediate solutions. I tried to give you the understandable definitions, i.e. without venturing into technicalities that certain times are incomprehensible even to those in the trade. Also because the purpose of this guide is that you understand the essential difference and then bring this knowledge in the field of SEO, which it is precisely the goal. In short, we have not yet entered into the specifics of bad neighborhood. Tranquilly not, I digress. But I need that before you acquire the essential notions. The SEO are a constantly moving science. I've said a few times, and then I repeat myself. But I would like that the concept is clear. When you find someone who talks to you about SEO in absolute terms, will have found a person not serious. For the simple reason that SEO is a tool in constant evolution. The word tool makes it a good idea to me. Every year from Google, but also other search engines, introduce thousands of algorithms to improve the research and at the same time penalizing dodger. What I'm saying is so true that some websites that 5 years ago were the most popular in terms of SEO and you are out of date today virtually disappeared from SERP. But we are not yet at the bad neighbor. Too many websites in a web server, better to avoid. And the same parameters that often snoxialia us webmasters are not due to certainties dictated by Google, but tests on tests, made with the websites, and assessing the responses of Google in its SERP. From these parameters we learned that primarily Google tends to penalize those shared websites operating side of too many other websites. Or better for Google, if a web server with an IP house too many websites, this is a sign of little value. And so there is a Google algorithm that does not reward your site. Be careful about what I said. To search engines typically do not care if you bought a sharing solution, cloud server, VPS or any other name, that in the coming years, will they think retailers managers of web space. The important thing is that your web server is not overloaded. Namely that the band used by Google in scan your site is not excessive. It's obvious that if your website is hosted on a web server with many other sites, the likelihood that Google has to spend a lot of bandwidth for you is very high. Avoid websites too cheap. If you are wondering, but it is possible that there are web servers that host thousands of websites, the answer is simple. But I answer with another question. Have you ever wondered how they do some managers to make economic super competitive bids? You find the main response. The situation described above is given for granted. So much so that Google even denies that corresponds to the truth. But there is also another problem. Reports of bad neighborhood are paid on the web. Have you ever faced the problem that maybe one of these sites in 1000 is infested with malware, or is a vehicle for them? With malware vehicle it means that the files are not hosted directly on this web space, but who may be transmitted from another site. Google does not distinguish in this brand, and immediately with flag malware, but specifying the no certainty whether the site is or is not the vehicle of infection. But the problem does not lie here. The statistical data we can now say with some certainty that the other sites hosted on the web server with that IP address are being penalized. In web parlance it means just that for bad neighborhood. Obviously the situation is more often on websites and sharing. They cost less and in short, those who manage them perhaps is less attentive to any situation on the sidelines. But if you think it's over you are wrong here. In fact, in the bad neighborhood to the algorithms of the major search engines also includes all sites here, that the explicit video and audio content. In short, the porn sites. But the problem does not end there. In fact, if the porn sites are easily identifiable from the name, the same does not apply to web spam as low information content, which then often the search engines identify the same thing. In short, to make you short a webmaster you vision are the site. To give a definite answer on your neighbor's web, you will see one by one all your neighbors. So for you an expenditure burden. Translating in a nutshell today's lesson on bad neighborhood in web could be: before you improve your home inside, or come back to live, you open the window, and look at who your neighbor casa. If you look up, and you do not see the end of your building, then changed area in web hosting provider is to say to change. Concluding on the web bad neighborhood. Now that I have explained the problem and you probably figured out the solution, i.e. rely on more expensive, and thus secure solutions. Here too, the maxim that those who spend many firm to build a website, it will be much closer to one that opens the website once a month to see if it still works or not. You want to know who your neighbors? Go you get Signal. Obviously you'll have to enter your website. Sometimes I'm asked the PHP script to get these sites to your neighbors. Unfortunately, for reasons that I'm not here to explain, this is not possible. CMQ, but there are some good sites that offer their APIs to access their database. Just you write API reverse lookup, and you will surely find one that suits your needs. The only drawback to this day, no one has accurate as you get Signal.